The Schaller Dome on Harken was a masterpiece of alien engineering. Its soaring crystalline arches reflected the light of twin suns into dazzling rainbows that danced across the summit chamber. Delegates from over 50 species were gathered under its glittering spires for the Intergalactic Health and Harmony Summit, a prestigious event dedicated to advancing medical collaboration across the galaxy. At the heart of the assembly, representing Earth for the first time, stood Dr. Julian Varon. Tall and wiry, with perpetually rumpled hair and a lively glint in his eyes, Julian exuded an energy that made him seem both approachable and out of place. His human medical kit, a hodgepodge of tools and instruments that clinked with every movement, hung from his shoulder like a badge of improvisational honor. "This is the human Dr. Valter," a towering Zentari general with glowing golden eyes, muttered to Corliss, the iridescent elder of the Nolari delegation. "He looks unprepared." Corliss clicked their mandibles thoughtfully. His methods are said to be unconventional, reckless even. Julian, overhearing the exchange, grinned. "You'd be surprised what humans can do with a little creativity, or a lot of caffeine." The comment only deepened their skepticism. The Retian delegation, known for their meticulous and disciplined approach to medicine, watched Julian with thinly veiled disapproval. Their chief medic, Xenthus, stood rigidly at the center of their group, his silver uniform immaculate. "Earth's inclusion in this summit is questionable," Xenthus said to the group, his voice crisp. "Humans have a reputation for improvisation, not precision. Medicine is not a field for improvisers." Before Julian could respond, a commotion broke out near the buffet tables. A Nolari diplomat yelped in distress as a clumsy server tipped over a tray of steaming beverages. The liquid splashed onto the diplomat's carapace, which immediately began to sizzle. "Acid," someone shouted. The room erupted into chaos. The Retian medics rushed forward, consulting their tablets for the proper protocol. A Zentari guard barked orders for containment. The injured diplomat collapsed to the ground, their bioluminescent eyes dimming in pain. Julian sprang into action. "Move, move," he said, pushing past a hesitant Retian medic. "What are you doing?" Corliss demanded as Julian knelt beside the injured Nolari. "Neutralizing the acid," Julian replied, pulling a water pitcher from the buffet and dousing the affected area. Then he rummaged through his kit and produced a small container of powder. "This'll do the trick." The Retian medic's eyes widened. "What is that substance? That isn't in the protocols." "Baking soda," Julian said, sprinkling the powder over the injury. "Neutralizes acid. Simple chemistry." But the sizzling stopped, and the injured diplomat let out a shaky sigh of relief. "That should hold until we can get them to the infirmary," Julian said, applying a sealant patch over the damaged exoskeleton. He turned to the stunned onlookers. "Anyone else need first aid?" The room fell silent. "That was reckless," Xenthus said, his voice tight. Julian stood, brushing his hands off. "It was effective." "You did not consult the proper procedures," Xenthus argued. "There wasn't time for procedures," Julian countered. "Sometimes you've got to make a call and act." The injured diplomat, still trembling, looked up. Pain subsided. Damage minimal. "Thank you, Dr. Varon." The alien leaders exchanged uneasy glances. Some, like Corliss, seemed grudgingly impressed. Others, like Valtor and Xenthus, were visibly displeased. "This summit is about collaboration," said a Moltran diplomat, their jelly-like body glowing softly. "Perhaps this moment is an opportunity to learn from one another's strengths." "Or expose our weaknesses," Valtor growled. Julian folded his arms, his smile undeterred. "If you want to test my methods, let's set it up. I'm happy to show you what humans can do." The challenge was set. The alien leaders would design a rigorous test to evaluate Julian's capabilities. Success or failure would determine whether humanity's chaotic approach to medicine had any place in the galaxy's most disciplined and advanced medical community. The stakes had never been higher, and Julian was determined to prove that in a universe of rules and protocols, there was still room for ingenuity and adaptability. The challenge was announced the following morning in the Schaller Dome's grand chamber. Delegates from across the galaxy assembled to watch what promised to be a clash of philosophies: human improvisation versus galactic protocol. Xanthus stepped forward to explain the parameters. Dr. Varon. He began, his voice amplified by the chamber's crystalline acoustics. You will be presented with a simulated mass casualty scenario involving multiple species. Each patient will have distinct and critical medical needs. Reflecting the diversity of this summit's attendees, your task is to stabilize as many as possible within 1 standard hour. Julian nodded, suppressing a grin. Sounds straightforward. Xanthus's silver eyes narrowed. I assure you, it will not be. The Rishan had spent the night preparing the simulation chamber. Each patient was represented by a highly advanced hologram that not only mimicked physical injuries, but also responded to treatment in real time. The scenario involved an asteroid impact on a starship carrying a diverse crew. Xanthus waved a hand, and the chamber transformed. Holographic fires crackled, and the air filled with simulated smoke and the hum of failing machinery. Holo patients groaned and called for help from their cots. The Rishan medics stepped forward first, demonstrating their methodical approach. They triaged patients according to a predefined order, consulting their tablets for precise protocols on each species' anatomy and biology. Their movements were synchronized, their tools pristine. Then it was Julian's turn. He strode into the chaos, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, and surveyed the scene. All right, people, let's get to work. The first patient was a Maltran hologram, their translucent forms shuddering as their internal bioluminescence dimmed. Respiratory distress, Julian muttered, kneeling beside them. Without hesitation, he adjusted the room's ambient temperature and increased the oxygen concentration around the patient. Maltrans need specific thermal and gas conditions to stabilize their metabolism, he explained aloud. The hologram's quivering eased, and its light brightened. Next, he moved to a Zentari soldier pinned beneath a simulated beam. Their holographic blood shimmered gold, pooling around a gash in their side. Julian examined the wound and grabbed a plasma scalpel from his kit. High risk of internal hemorrhaging, he said. Let's stop the bleeding first, he worked quickly, sealing the wound with deft precision. A Nolari patient followed, their exoskeleton cracked and leaking luminous fluid. Julian improvised a brace for the fracture using materials from the simulated environment, a nearby railing and strips of adhesive. Improvisation again, Xanthus's voice crackled through the simulation's intercom. Julian glanced up. Hey, if it works, it works. As the test continued, Julian's approach stood in stark contrast to the Rishan medic's regimented methods. He moved rapidly from patient to patient, using intuition, experience, and creativity to address their needs. He repurposed tools, modified treatments on the fly, and even borrowed techniques from species he'd only briefly studied. The simulation ended with a sharp chime, and the chamber returned to its default state. The Rishan had stabilized 4 patients. Julian had stabilized 7. The room buzzed with murmurs as the results were displayed. This is unacceptable, Xanthus barked, stepping forward. Your methods were erratic, unsanctioned, and reckless. Julian shrugged, a lopsided smile on his face, and they saved more lives. Corliss raised a clawed hand, their iridescent shell glinting. Dr. Varon's success cannot be dismissed, Xanthus. He has demonstrated an ability to adapt where we rely on rigid protocols. That is a strength worth considering. Strength Voltor's booming voice echoed across the chamber. Or luck. Luck didn't stabilize 7 patients, Julian said, his tone firm. In a real emergency, you don't always have time to consult protocols. You act. You solve the problem in front of you. The debate continued, with some alien leaders advocating for Julian's methods and others clinging to their skepticism. But the discussion was cut short by an ear-splitting alarm. Attention, a mechanical voice announced. Dome breach detected in the eastern sector. Toxic gas leakage imminent. All personnel to emergency stations. Julian tightened the strap on his medical bag. Well, he said, a wry grin forming. Looks like I get to prove my point all over again. Without waiting for instructions, he sprinted toward the eastern sector, leaving the alien leaders to follow in his wake. Julian reached the eastern sector of the Schaller Dome to find chaos. The asteroid fragment had punched a jagged hole through the crystalline structure, and the emergency containment fields were flickering under the strain. Toxic fumes from Harkin's atmosphere seeped in, swirling like ghostly tendrils through the damaged chamber. Delegates and staff stumbled through the haze, coughing and calling for help. Several lay on the ground, their forms crumpled and motionless. Emergency teams were scattered, struggling to stabilize the injured while trying to keep themselves safe. Julian pulled a filtration mask from his bag and fitted it over his face. He grabbed a Zentari guard who was directing panicked bystanders. "What's the status?" "The containment field is failing," the Zentari growled, their golden eyes flickering with tension. "Engineers are trying to stabilize it, but we have injured everywhere. Medics are overwhelmed." Julian nodded. "Got it. You focus on getting people out. I'll handle the injured." The guard hesitated. "Alone." Julian gave a reassuring grin. "Not for long, I hope." He knelt beside the nearest patient, a Retian technician gasping for air. Their silver skin had a pale sheen, and their breathing was labored. "Toxic gas exposure," Julian muttered, pulling a vial from his bag. "Let's stabilize those lungs." He administered an oxygen booster and a bronchodilator, his hands moving quickly but steadily. The technician's breathing eased, and their eyes fluttered open. "You're going to be fine," Julian said. "Now get to safety." As he moved to the next patient, Xanthus and a team of Retian medics arrived, their pristine uniforms already smudged with soot. "Dr. Varan," Xanthus called. "What are you doing?" "Saving lives," Julian replied, not looking up. He was using a portable cauterizer to seal a bleeding wound on a Zentari delegate. "You are working without a plan," Xanthus protested. "I have a plan," Julian shot back. "Fix the people. Then fix the field." Xanthus was about to retort when a thunderous groan echoed through the chamber. The containment field flickered violently, and a sharp crack of energy shot across the room. "Field collapse imminent," shouted a Zentari engineer. Julian glanced at the emitter at the heart of the breach. The device was sparking and smoking, its power conduit damaged. "If that thing fails, this whole sector floods with gas," he said. "Then we must evacuate," Xanthus said. "There's no time," Julian barked. "I need someone to stabilize the emitter while I handle the patients." Xanthus hesitated, his disciplined mind warring with the chaos of the situation. Finally he nodded. "I will coordinate with the engineers." "Good man," Julian said, clapping him on the shoulder. As Xanthus ran toward the emitter, Julian turned his attention back to the injured. He used makeshift splints, saline drips, and even a heat source from a broken panel to stabilize various patients. The room became a whirlwind of activity, with Julian directing alien medics to help where they could. Valtor arrived moments later, his imposing figure cutting through the smoke. "This sector is a death trap," he growled. "Why are you still here?" "Because there are people who still need help," Julian replied. Valtor's golden eyes narrowed. Then, with a grunt, he moved to assist, lifting a fallen beam off a trapped Nolari delegate with ease. "You are lucky I do not value protocol as much as Xanthus." Julian smirked. "I knew there was a soft spot under all that armor." Together, they worked to clear the injured as the containment field continued to falter. Sparks rained down from the emitter as Xanthus and the engineers fought to stabilize it. The air grew thicker, the toxic gases pressing against the fragile barrier. Finally, Xanthus shouted, "The emitter is holding for now, but we need to evacuate immediately." Julian scanned the chamber. All the injured had been stabilized and moved to safety, except for a young Maltran delegate who lay near the breach, their form dim and quivering. "We're not done yet," Julian said, rushing toward the Maltran. Valtor grabbed his arm. "The field won't hold. If you go, you may not return." Julian pulled free. "Then I guess you'll have to pull me out." He reached the Maltran and knelt beside them, quickly assessing their condition. They were hypothermic, their delicate physiology struggling against the gas. Julian removed his own jacket and wrapped it around their trembling form before administering a metabolic stabilizer. "Hang in there," he murmured, lifting the delegate into his arms. The containment field let out a final, agonizing groan as Julian sprinted back toward the safe zone. Sparks flew, and the room was bathed in blinding light as the emitter faltered. At the last second, Walter's massive hand grabbed Julian's arm and hauled him across the threshold. The containment field collapsed behind them, sealing the breach with an emergency fail-safe. Julian collapsed onto the floor, coughing and gasping for air as medics rushed to take the Maltran delegate from his arms. Walter loomed over him, shaking his head. "You are insane." Julian gave a weak laugh. "And you're welcome." Around them, the chamber filled with murmurs of relief and admiration. Xanthus approached, his silver uniform now scorched and torn. "Dr. Varen," he said, his tone reluctant but sincere, "your methods are infuriating. But you saved lives today. More than I expected." Julian sat up, his grin tired but triumphant. "I'll take that as a compliment." Walter crossed his arms. "You are reckless. But I cannot deny your courage, or your results." The alien leaders exchanged glances, their skepticism giving way to cautious respect. Julian had done more than save lives. He had proven that adaptability and ingenuity could rival even the galaxy's most advanced protocols. The aftermath of the breach left the Schaller Dome bustling with activity. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair the structural damage, and medics tended to those still recovering. The air was thick with an unusual energy, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and something Julian hadn't expected: admiration. He sat in the temporary infirmary, his back against a wall, clutching a steaming cup of herbal tea that a Maltran delegate had offered him. Across the room, Xanthus was reviewing holographic reports, his usually sharp demeanor tempered by fatigue. The door slid open, and Walter entered, his golden eyes as intense as ever. He stopped in front of Julian, crossing his arms. "You should be dead," Walter said bluntly. Julian sipped his tea. "Good to see you too, General." Walter's lips twitched in what might have been the faintest hint of amusement. "You acted recklessly. Again." Julian raised an eyebrow. And Walter said, his tone softening, "Your recklessness saved lives. Even mine." Julian grinned. "Careful, General. You keep talking like that, and people might think we're friends." Before Walter could respond, Xanthus approached, his tablet tucked under one arm. His expression was unreadable, but his steps were deliberate. "Dr. Varen," Xanthus began, "I have reviewed the data from the breach response. It is clear that your actions were instrumental in preventing a greater disaster. However—" Julian groaned. "There's always a however." "However," Xanthus continued, ignoring the interruption, "your methods remain unconventional. You disregard protocols, repurpose tools without authorization, and prioritize speed over precision." "And it worked," Julian said, setting down his cup. "It worked," Xanthus admitted, though the words seemed to pain him. "Your adaptability and intuition allowed you to succeed where others would have failed. I cannot ignore the results." The Rishan medic paused, his silver eyes meeting Julian's. "It is possible that there is merit in your approach. Perhaps structure and adaptability are not mutually exclusive." "Are you saying you might borrow some of my tricks?" Julian asked, his grin widening. "I am saying," Xanthus replied, "that we should study them." A soft hum of agreement filled the room as more delegates filtered in. Corliss, the Nolari elder, stood near the door, their iridescent exoskeleton catching the light. "Dr. Varen," Corliss said, "you have challenged our understanding of medicine. Your actions today were chaotic, yes, but they revealed a truth we have long ignored: the universe is unpredictable. Perhaps our practices should reflect that." The Maltran diplomat, glowing faintly, stepped forward. "I propose a formal initiative. An exchange of medical knowledge between Earth and the galactic community. Let us learn from humanity's adaptability and ingenuity." Walter's booming voice joined the conversation. "I agree. While I still find your methods infuriating, Dr. Varen, I cannot deny their effectiveness. The Zentari would benefit from such an exchange." Julian stood, brushing off his wrinkled coat. "So let me get this straight. You want me, us humans, to teach you how to work with a little chaos?" Corliss nodded. "It seems we have much to learn from each other." For the first time, Julian's grin softened into something genuine. "You know, that's the thing about humans. We thrive when things get messy. It's not about breaking the rules, it's about knowing which ones can bend when it really matters." The room fell into a contemplative silence, the weight of Julian's words settling over the group. The summit resumed the next day with a renewed sense of purpose. Julian's lecture on emergency medicine, titled Adaptability in Action, became the centerpiece of the event. Delegates crowded into the hall to witness his demonstrations, which ranged from rapid triage techniques to creative uses of standard tools. By the summit's end, a formal agreement had been signed. Earth would join an intergalactic consortium to share and develop medical practices. Humanity's reputation for ingenuity had not only been recognized but celebrated. As the delegates prepared to leave the repaired Schaller Dome, Corliss approached Julian one last time. "Dr. Varon," they said, extending a clawed hand, "your methods have reshaped my understanding of medicine. Thank you for challenging our conventions." Julian shook their hand firmly. "And thank you for trusting me. If you ever need a crash course in thinking on your feet, you know where to find me." Corliss chuckled softly, a sound Julian had never thought he'd hear from a Nolari. As the human delegation boarded their ship, Julian paused at the ramp, glancing back at the glittering spires of the Schaller Dome. Earth's place in the galaxy was still new and unsteady, but today they had proven that ingenuity, even when chaotic, had a vital role to play. As the ship lifted off, Julian leaned back in his seat, a satisfied smile on his face. "I wonder what kind of trouble we'll stir up at the next summit."